Hollywood actor Ben Stiller travels to Ukraine to meet the president, telling Volodymyr Zelensky he's his hero.
Plus, a big bid to help the refugees of Ukraine. The Russian Nobel Peace Laureate, Dmitry Muratov, auctions his medal for more than $100 million to raise funding for Ukrainian children displaced by the war. I do want to tell you about the Russian journalist and Nobel Peace Laureate Dmitry Muratov, because he's auctioned his Nobel medal and it sold for just over $103 million. Now, he said all that money will be going to help refugees from the war in Ukraine. Muratov was the editor of Novaya Gazeta, which is a Russian independent newspaper, which suspended its work this year when the Russian government declared that it was a crime to contradict the Kremlin's official position on Ukraine. There you can see some of the bids coming in there on the phones there. Ultimately, 103 million. Well, Mr. Muratov did speak to bidders before the auction began.
We hope that this will serve as an example for other people, like a flash mob for other people to auction their valuable possessions, their heirlooms, to help Ukrainian refugees around the world.
And the Hollywood actor and campaigner Ben Stiller has told BBC Breakfast that he's worried that the world might forget about the victims of Ukraine's war.
He made the comments on a visit to the city of Irpin as part of his role as an ambassador for the United Nations Refugee Agency.
And while he was in the capital, Kyiv, he also met there with President Zelensky, calling him his hero. And he complimented the president on his previous acting career. Now, the Zoolander star has been working as a goodwill ambassador for the UN since 2016. And just before he left Kyiv, he described to me the impact that this visit has had on him.
The thing that gets me is these are just people like you and I who have been caught in a circumstance totally beyond their control. You know, nobody wants to flee from their home. Nobody wants to have to go out into the world and have to start fresh or even just try to find a way to survive. And that's what I'm taking with these people who are just living their lives. Mothers, fathers, families, friends. The stories we heard today were from mothers who, when this shelling and these rocket attacks started at the beginning of the war, were having to grab their kids in the middle of the night. One mother, two twins who had to grab her kids and run for shelter, not even knowing where to go for shelter. They went to the basement, then had to wait till the sound of the rockets had gone away and take a chance to come back up and grab their clothes, and then not know where to even go for safety. I mean, these kinds of stories where, you know, you just try to place yourself in that situation and think, what would happen if somebody, you know, if a rocket came screaming by my apartment? We met a lady today who is living in her house that was almost completely destroyed by a rocket, where half of the house is just collapsed, and she's still living there with her husband because they have no place else to go.
That's the physical wreckage, the physical destruction, but there's the hidden damage, that the mental scars must be all too obvious when you talk to people up close as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually really what's more disturbing when you talk to people and more affecting. We talked to a group of people that all go to a community center in Irvine that was hit by 3 missiles. We saw the community center, which was basically destroyed in terms of them being able to use it at all. And so we sat with them and talked about their stories. And there's one young man who just described what the night was for him, I think February 24th or February 25th, when he said it was like a horror movie, not knowing where to go, running out into the streets, not knowing if where he was running was a safe place because they didn't know where the rockets were coming from, and just hoping he'd see his girlfriend's face again, his parents' face again, just this fear that he was never going to even be able to connect or see people that he loved again. And you could see the trauma in his eyes, and you know, as he's talking about it, then the further atrocities he saw from the soldiers that came in that you know, deeply affected him and will, he said, for, you know, basically for the rest of his life. So these people all have so many issues that they're going to have to deal with, just as you said, psychologically, let alone trying to put a roof over their heads. So there's a lot to be to pay attention to here, and to try to in some way help. As you know, the biggest thing is for the war to stop. You know, it's a senseless war, and wars, you know, everywhere are having these effects on people all over the world.
And there was that massive expression of generosity and goodwill when the war first started. How concerned are you that as time goes on and the seasons pass and maybe we start to think about the economy and our own individual countries and the cost of living and that kind of thing, that Ukraine disappears from the headlines and maybe we start to forget? How much does that worry you?
Well, it's a real thing. I mean, and it's very valid too, because we all have to deal with our own problems in life and what's right in front of us. And all of these things that you're talking about, domestic issues, pocketbook issues, things that affect us on a day-to-day basis, are very important and top of mind. But I think the reality is that our news cycle goes so quickly that it's really hard to keep attention on these issues that maybe don't affect us directly, but they do have an effect on us overall. I mean, wars do. They have trickle-down effects economically and in all other ways. But just morally, just our responsibility that we have to each other as people, I think, is something that everybody feels and wants to do something about. So yeah, as time goes by, it only gets tougher for people who are displaced, the people who are affected by this war, besides the fact that attention goes away. As I was saying, winter is coming and they have to figure out how to survive, how to find jobs, how to take care of their families as the news cycle has moved on, and also the attention of other organizations too, because there's so many different things going on all over the world in terms of conflict. So the tough thing is that for these refugees, that their situation doesn't get any easier; it only gets harder. So the more attention we can shine on this, the more that we can talk about it. If that you're willing to listen and talk about it, and I think is an important thing. I'm grateful for that, because these people are just trying to make their way in life and have a life like you and I and go forward. And it's a really tough road for a lot of them.
Have you felt in danger there? Have you felt at risk?
No, I mean, it's my first time coming to an area that's in conflict, but it's really kind of strange, because when you drive into the country, really in the west of the country, you don't feel the conflict. Lviv, except for the curfew at night, where it gets very quiet and a little bit eerie. Lviv, people seem to be going back to life as normal, or trying to as much as possible. And then as you get closer and closer to Kyiv and into the east of the country, you start to see the roadblocks and see the destruction, which is really shocking when you haven't seen anything like that up close. I mean, I'm an actor, so the first thing I go to is like, oh, it looks like a movie. But the scale of it is even bigger, and it's real. And so that's really distressing. And then in terms of safety, inside the city in Kyiv, people are doing their thing. They're living, they're going out to dinner. We went out to dinner tonight. And it feels like people are trying to get back to normal here. And, the reality is the war is right now focused in a different part of the country. That doesn't mean it can't come back here. But it's a very different reality in the east right now, or in some cities in the south, for sure.
Ben Stiller, thank you so much for joining us on BBC Breakfast.
All right, thanks for having me.
It was really, you can sense his commitment to it. He was really serious about it. But I was really struck as well by the fact that he was talking about this kind of conflict between the destruction he's seen, but then the normality as well. He was saying he'd just been out to a bar, he'd been for dinner, he'd been walking around meeting people, had an ice cream, which you just don't think, do you, that he's also in a war zone?
And the thing that he was there to do was, I suppose, to bring attention to the plight of people who are still there, people who've had to leave. And we can go live now to Kyiv this morning and talk to our correspondent Joe Inwood. And that's something, I know, Joe, that's very, very important for lots of people who are still there, isn't it? That the world doesn't forget what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a concern here that there will be a growing fatigue in the West, in European nations, in North America, especially as the economic consequences of this war start to be felt around the world. I mean, we're talking on Breakfast this morning about the cost of living crisis, as we do so often. And that is not disconnected from what's going on here. And I think that's the concern. And that's the reason many people will look at a visit of someone like Ben Stiller and say, why are celebrities coming to a war zone? And it's a fair question. But the reason they are is because it is important to keep this war in people's minds. I mean, we stand here every day and talk about grinding conflicts, and Ben Stiller was talking there about the conflict in the East, and often it sounds the same every day because things are not moving fast, but they are moving, and it does matter what is happening here. And I think there is a real fear that we're going to get fatigue in the West, and if that happens, if you start to get a loss of public support, then there is a concern that the military support that has been crucial for the war effort of the Ukrainians, is going to start to drop away. And I think the events are all connected, and there is a real fear that we might start to see a lack of popular support, and that's why visits like Ben Stiller's are so welcomed by the Ukrainian president.